Well, good morning, everyone. Sorry that we're running a little late. We had a little bit of a late morning in the Shanley household with breakfast, and then Chrome decided to not work with my laptop for going live today. So, little late. Thank you to the family to understanding. Thank you especially to my wife Mo for volunteering to be camera person. And without further ado, we'll get right to it. Just to remind everyone, format for today live is going to be, we're going to read the story. I'll talk a little bit about what some of the lessons are, and then I'll try and take some questions and answers. Although I'm going to warn everyone, normally I have my laptop up to be able to see it, and I'll have to reset that up. So today, our story is Puss in Boots. You like this one, right?
Yeah, I like Puss in Boots.
You like Puss in Boots? What about you? Yeah. All right. Once upon a time, there was an old miller who died, leaving nothing for his 3 sons apart from his mill, his donkey, and his cat. The 3 sons decided to split this poor property between themselves. The eldest son took the mill, the second son took the donkey, and the third received nothing but the cat. Understandably, the youngest son was a little disappointed with his share being so small. "My brothers may make a handsome enough living if they combine their shares together," said the younger son. "But for my part, once I've eaten his cat and made a hat out of his skin, I must die of hunger." The cat heard the youngest son saying all this, but he appeared to make no notice at all. Instead, he turned to his master with a grave and serious air and said, "Don't worry yourself, master. All you have to do is give me a bag and a pair of boots so that I can easily run across the thorns and brambles. And you shall soon see that as my owner, you don't have such a poor share after all." That is what's called the power of positive thinking. Although the youngest son did not entirely trust what the cat had said, he remembered that he had seen the cat playing cunning tricks to catch rats and mice. He had hung himself by the heels to make the mice think that he was dead and that he had hidden himself in the corn, so that the cat's master did not completely despair of the cat and help him out of the situation. The young man also realized that he had a talking cat. That is something special. Once his young master had given him his new boots and bag, the cat was very pleased. He thought he looked very gallant and elegant in his shiny boots. Wearing his new boots, the cat hung his bag around his neck and held its string to his 2 forepaws. He went out into the field and found some tender, juicy grass to put in the bag. The cat then went to a nearby rabbit warren that he knew where a great number of rabbits lived. He stretched himself out on the ground as though he were dead, making sure that some of the grass in the bag was poking out. The cat lay there, waiting for some young rabbits, and the young rabbits were not quite acquainted with the tricks of the world, to come along and tempt the food in his bag. The cat had barely laid himself down when a young foolish rabbit hopped up. It sniffed him, climbed into the bag to eat the tender grass, and at once the cat drew close the strings, catching the rabbit unawares. We have the rabbit, we have Puss in his boots, and then we have him catching the rabbit. Oh, yeah. You want to see it? Okay, look at that. Proud of his catch, the cat headed off to the palace and asked to see the king. He was shown to the king's court, where he made a low bow to all those assembled there. "I have brought for you, sire, a rabbit from the warren of my noble master, the Marquis of Carabas," which was the title the cat was pleased to invent for his master. "He commanded me to bring this to your majesty as a gift." The king was very pleased with the gift, as he was extremely fond of tasty rabbit. "Tell thy master," said the king, "that I thank him, and that I am well pleased with his gift." The cat departed, happy with the outcome of his endeavor. Yeah. Oh, you want to see the picture? Whoop. There it is. Shortly after this, the cat hid himself among some tall corn in a field again, and his bag wrapped around his neck. He stood as though a statue near the tallest, tastiest-looking corn that he could find, and held his bag open. It wasn't long before 2 partridges came along, and in their efforts to eat the corn, fell into the open bag. At once the cat drew the strings closed, catching both birds. There he is catching the corn, or catching the birds. As he had done with the rabbit, the cat went to the palace and made a present of partridges for the king. In the same way, the king received the partridges with great pleasure. The king even commanded his servants to reward the cat with a gold coin. Over the course of the next 2 or 3 months, the cat continued to take some of his master's game as a gift to the king. The king was always very pleased to receive these offerings, and he rewarded the cat with a gold coin. I mean, it may not be a mill, but at least he's getting something, right?
Gold is more precious than a little mill.
Well, the mill is what's called business, buddy. It makes money. Well, it makes flour, which is sold for money. One day, the cat discovered the king was to go for a drive along the riverside to get some fresh air and enjoy the sunshine. The cat also discovered that the king was taking his daughter, the most beautiful princess in the world, with him on the drive. The cat went to his master and said, "If you follow my advice, your fortune is made. You don't have to do anything apart from going to the river and having a bath at the spot I show you. Just leave the rest to me." The cat's master was confused as to why the cat was asking him to do this, but he did as the cat advised. It is a talking cat that's made him a whole bunch of money so far, so that's probably a good idea. Yeah. While he was bathing, the king's carriage passed by. At once, the king cried out at the top of his voice, "Help! Help! My master, the Marquis of Carabas, is drowning! Help! Help!" Hearing the noise, the king looked out of the carriage window. Seeing the cat who had brought him so many gifts of game, he commanded his guards to immediately run to the assistance of his lordship, the Marquis of Carabas. As the king's guards were pulling the Marquis out of the river, the cat hid his master's clothes under a large heavy rock. Then the cat went up to the coach and told the king that while his master was bathing, some thieves came and stole his clothes, even though the cat had cried out, "Thieves! Thieves!" as loudly as he could. At once, the king commanded some of his guards to run and fetch his best suits for the Marquis of Carabas to wear. The king was exceedingly polite to the Marquis once he had put on a fine suit and some of the clothes to set off his good looks, for he was rather handsome. And the king saw that his lovely daughter was taken with the Marquis. The Marquis had exchanged only 1 or 2 respectful, tender glances with her before they found themselves in love. The king invited the Marquis to join them on their drive. Doesn't he look handsome?
Yeah.
All right. She look like she in love? No. Okay. The cat was overjoyed to see his plan succeeding. He marched on ahead of the coach and met some people mowing in a meadow, which was owned by a cruel ogre. "Good mowers," said the cat, "the ogre who owns this field has asked me to tell you that if you do not tell the king that the meadow you are mowing belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, he will chop you up into tiny pieces and cook you in his pot." The mowers were very frightened of the ogre, so when the king drove past and asked them who owned this meadow, they all immediately answered, "The Marquis of Carabas does, your majesty." "You have a fine meadow there," the king said to the Marquis. "Yes, sire," replied the Marquis, thinking quickly. "It gives me a good harvest every year." The cat continued on ahead until he met some reapers, who were harvesting corn in another field owned by the ogre. "Good reapers," said the cat, "the ogre who owns this field has asked me to tell you that if you do not tell the king that this corn belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, he will chop you up into tiny pieces and cook you in his pot. And when the king passed the field in his carriage and asked them who owned it, they all replied, "The Marquis of Carabas owns this corn, your majesty." The cat went on ahead and told everyone that the ogre had said to tell the king the land was owned by the Marquis of Carabas. Everyone was so scared of the ogre that they did. This isn't a legal lesson, but it is a leadership lesson. No,
it's a
David,
legal lesson.
David, the lesson here is don't rule by fear. Okay. Eventually, the cat came to the ogre's home, which was an enormous, stately manor. The ogre was the richest ogre ever known. The cat, who had discovered the ogre's magical talent, asked to see him, saying he couldn't pass without paying his respects. After some grumbling, the ogre let him in and made him sit down.
Sit down.
"I have been told that you have an amazing gift," said the cat to the ogre. "They tell me that you can change yourself into any creature you choose, such as a lion. Surely this is not true." "It is true. If you don't believe me, let me prove it to you," said the proud ogre, and he turned himself into a fierce, snarling lion. The cat seemed so terrified at the sight of the lion that he jumped up and tried to climb up onto the cupboard, which was rather awkward because of his boots. When he saw that the ogre had returned to his normal form, he slowly climbed down. That is impressive," said the cat. "But I've also been told that you can take on the shape of the smallest animal, such as a mouse. Surely, though, that's impossible." "Impossible!" roared the ogre. "Watch, and you shall see." The ogre changed himself into a tiny mouse and began to run around the room. The cat immediately sprung up and ate him. Just then the king's coach drove by the fine castle. The king, wanting to see who lived there, ordered the coach to go in. The cat, hearing the coach coming over the drawbridge, came out to meet them and said to the king, "Welcome to the castle of my lord, the Marquis of Carabas." "What? My lord Carabas," cried the king. "Does this fine castle belong to you too? Let us see inside, if you please." The Marquis helped the princess down from the coach, and they followed the king inside the castle. There was a magnificent feast prepared in the great hall for the ogre. The king was perfectly charmed with the fine qualities of the Marquis as the princess, who had fallen completely in love with him. The king could see that his daughter was in love with the Marquis, and he was so impressed on seeing the vast estates and fine castle that the Marquis owned that he insisted that the Marquis and the princess get married that very day.
And now, the lesson is buy a cat, everyone. Then you will become a king.
Okay, thank you. They lived happily ever after. The cat became a great lord, and he never chased mice again, although sometimes he did, for fun.
The lesson here is that you always buy a cat. It will make you famous.
Now,
adopt a cat.
We'll run along. Run along. Now we'll talk about the boring adult stuff. The actual lesson.
Boring adult stuff.
Children in quarantine don't always mix well. Or social distancing, I should say. So what is the lesson here? There are a lot of interesting ones along the way. But when we talk about this inside of estate planning, there's one of value. When we start the story, we're given a very set value for the three pieces of property that are out there. There's the mill, there's the donkey, and then there's the cat. As I was explaining to the kids through the process, the mill in this case would be like a large windmill, something for grinding like grain into flour. It's a business. The donkey is an essential component of the business to turn the mill wheel. The cat seems extraneous. This is not something that's uncommon where you have one piece of property inside of a plan that's going to drive everything. Sometimes even a business, you're going to have one child or one person that's going to be able to run it and a couple that may or may not. How do we break this apart so that it's fair? In this case, the eldest took it because he's the eldest and there was no plan. The middle child was able to get in because the donkey is an essential component, and the third child is cut out. This may or may not be what the miller wanted. We don't know, but there was a really big lack of plan that went to that. That really didn't help family unity. The youngest son was strut off on his own to find his own way with the cat. But the big point of this, and the big lesson that I like to point out in this, is this. It's very easy to think that the mill is the most valuable piece. It's worth a lot, it's real property, there's a large bit of equipment and machinery that goes along with the business, as well as, I'm assuming, clientele. Maybe not that many because it was a poor miller, but enough clientele to make the whole thing run and provide us a livelihood. And yet, despite this, it was the cat that was the most valuable piece of property. The cat got the youngest son wealth, a castle, married to the king's daughter. I mean, this is an amazing piece of property, an amazing return on this investment that all it took was buying a pair of boots. We don't know what is going to be that valuable a piece of property. So, as you're forming your plan, it's important to be honest with yourself, review this, and take a look, and then figure out a way to equally break this apart so that you can have your family unity and be able to produce the values that you want to protect. So I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to open up my laptop and look to see what questions there are. Usually my lovely wife assists me with this at the same time, so I can look and see and still talk to everybody while I'm doing this. Today it was a little different. Let's see here. And I am seeing myself. This is awesome. See if there are any comments. Right now I am not, although I did get one ahead of time. I talked about this around the office. My wife had asked me ahead of this, talking about how exactly do we get things valued, which is a very good question. When we talk about how do we value property, there's going to be a couple things. It's going to be appraisers. Typically, after someone has died, this should be done relatively early for a couple reasons. One major one's actually a tax reason. A lot of people don't realize this, but the IRS, at least as it sits right now, allows you to adjust what's called the basis of property 6 months after someone had died. So one of the first things that is a good idea to do would be to evaluate some of this property, particularly something very valuable like, say, a house. If you can get the basis to go up in value, then you can get the amount that you're going to be taxed on it down in value. So having that done, depending upon the market and the timing and your feasibility to get an appraiser out there, is generally a good idea. How do you value it? Well, if it's a house, you get a real estate appraiser. That's pretty straightforward. If it's personal property, you're still probably going to want an appraiser, in which case you'll be hiring either some sort of professional appraisal service, or you will be looking at getting auctioneers are usually a good example of this too. So one of my favorite appraisers to work with out here is Massert in Green Bay. So looking to see if there are any other comments and questions. Otherwise, I'm not seeing any. Excuse me, which is fine. Thank you for joining me today. Next week, I will have another story. It'll be Cinderella. So join me for the same time next week. And remember, at Peterson, Berk Cross, we're specializing in you.